Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second FY 2024 Budget Public Forum. Today is Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. This meeting hearing of the Select Board will be held in person at the location provided on this notice. Members of the public are welcome to attend this in-person meeting. I'm right in the right one. Okay. Please note that while an option for remote attendance and/or participation via Zoom is being provided as a courtesy to the public, the meeting hearing will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast unless otherwise required by law. For the public with particular interest in a specific item on this agenda should make plans for in-person versus virtual attendance accordingly. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may access the proceedings by joining Zoom meeting ID number 849-4805-4993 or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Carly Antonellis, Assistant Town Manager at atm@ayer.ma.us or 978-772-8220 extension 100 prior to the meeting. At this time, I will call the Select Board to order. Mr. Hood is on his way and Mr. Copeland is on Zoom. Okay, so the Select Board has a quorum. Kurt?
Hi, my name is Kurt Breskowski, Chairman of the Finance Committee. It's call our committee to order, and I have myself here. Jin Hung is in attendance, and Andrew Seeley is joining us by Zoom. So we have
All right, so tonight will be the second FY 2024 budget public presentation. So we're going to listen to the presentation. I would like all the speakers to ensure that they speak clearly so that everyone can hear you, those online and those in the back of the room. Okay. And at this time, I will turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Select Board, members of the Finance Committee. Good evening, and thank you for having us here for the second public budget forum. A lot of material to cover in a quick period of time. And most importantly, we want to get to questions and input from the Select Board and the Finance Committee and from all of the residents in attendance. Before I start, I just want to thank Carly Antonellis, the Assistant Town Manager, and Barbara Tierney, the Finance Manager, for all of their work and help with this presentation. I also want to just point out our internal finance team, Barbara Tierney, our Finance Manager, Carrie Cooper, our Town Accountant, Linda McQuaid, our Town Assessor, and Amanda Lewis, our Benefits and Payroll Manager, as we meet often and at least weekly working on financial issues and the budget for the town. And lastly, I just want to thank all of the town department heads, Madam Chair, that are in attendance tonight, that are available to answer any questions related to their specific budgets or financial matters related to their department. I thank them for being here, as well as all of the board and committees that make our budget possible. So one thing this presentation is based off of draft 3 of the budget, which was submitted to the Select Board and the Finance Committee on March 3rd, and has been on the town budget page. And I'm going to periodically refer to the town's budget page on the town's website, as it is a repository for all of the information related to the FY24 budget. We want folks to check that out. If people need hard copies of things, they're available upon request through the Select Board Town Manager's office during normal business hours. Please let us know. And if there's a question on any of that material or something that you think is missing, please let us know as well, as we want you to have that information. So, Madam Chair, I have a brief presentation I'll just go through and then turn it back to you and the FinCom for questions and input, and of course, from the public. So the first slide is where we are in the municipal budget process. And as many know, that is exactly what the budget is. It is a cycle that goes throughout the year. And this slide shows the various highlights on that process. It's also, this budget calendar is set by the Select Board each October. And so the dates and deadlines are specific that we all follow. And if there's any changes, they have to be made before the Select Board. So the red circle shows where we are tonight on the second public budget forum as we're rapidly approaching town meeting next month on April the 24th. So the first, I always like to start, as I did the last presentation and all presentations, that the town of Ayer is in a strong position of fiscal stability and financial strength. And this did not happen overnight. This is a testament to the town. It has been at least 30 years, if not more, in the making. But it's important because it's something that the whole town should be proud of. It takes everybody's effort, including the support of town meeting and the residents to do this. What I would just like to point out, our certified free cash was 1.9 million for FY 2022. This is the 7th year in a row that it's been over $1 million, and we're going to talk about free cash momentarily in the presentation. Our stabilization fund is over 2.6 million, and our capital stabilization fund is over 3.4 million. And just as a refresher, I want to point out that the stabilization and the capital stabilization funds are under the authority of town meeting. To access them and to use them would take a act of town meeting and a 2/3 vote. So these are not, these reserves are not under the town manager or any department. They're not under the select board or the FinCom, under the people at town meeting. Our Standard & Poor bond rating remains a AA2, which is, there's only another level, one level higher from that. That's significant. Each year we do a rating call. This is an independent third-party professional analysis. It points to a very strong economy, strong management with good financial policies and practices and healthy reserves. Next. So the reserve fund, I'd like to point out in the budget, the reserve fund is a fund that is under the select board and the finance committee. This is, in an ideal world, the budget would be set and nothing else would deviate from that. But we do know that life happens in the year ahead. So the reserve fund is a mechanism that we use for two criteria. One is unforeseen expenditures throughout the year or extraordinary expenditures. And this doesn't just mechanically happen under the town manager or department or the select board. It requires a vote of the select board and the FinCom in most cases. So it's sort of our safety or our reserve throughout the year. Why I put this slide up here, as you can see from FY16 to FY21, we historically budgeted $150,000 in the reserve. And you can see how much was used in different years. In some years, it was high. FY26, FY 2016, I recall there was some unforeseen litigation and so forth that the town didn't know at the time of budgeting. And then in other years like FY20, much lower. In FY 2022, when we entered the COVID pandemic, the town increased the 150 to 300,000 because there was a lot of uncertainty as to what could happen in the pandemic, and we wanted to plan accordingly. As you can see, fortunately, we only needed $81,000 that year. In FY 2023, last year, we recommended another 300,000 because we were coming out of the pandemic and with other uncertainties. And to date, there's been nothing spent. So we are proposing, and we'll be discussing this with the FinCom at one of their meetings, and I have with the select board. We're proposing at this point of getting back to pre-pandemic levels and budgeting $175,000 for FY24 for the reserve fund. We feel, with the pandemic behind us, also based on these trends here, this is an adequate amount. So I point that out because draft 3 assumes an adjustment down to $175,000. Okay, next. Then the school budget, since we last met on the first public forum back in January, we do have both of the school assessments. Both of these appear as individual articles on the town meeting warrant. The first one is the assessment for the Ayer Shirley Regional School District at 13.6 million, representing a 3.6% increase. from last year. In the Neshoba Valley Technical High School's assessment at just over 1.6 million, representing a 14% increase. What is driving that 14% increase from Neshoba Valley Tech is it is student-based. So the student enrollment of Ayer students to Neshoba has increased significantly. The student enrollment drives up that number. So both of these will appear as individual articles at the town meeting. If you go to the budget page, we have the budgets for both of the school districts on there. Next. So the history of the omnibus increase, which is draft 3 of the omnibus. So I've highlighted in yellow where draft 3 sits as of March 3rd is at $18,012,857. It represents a 6.19% increase. You will see what I put on the slide starting with the base year from fiscal year 2014 all the way up is the omnibus amounts approved and the percent increases going up. You'll see the average annual omnibus budget percent increase from FY14 to FY 2023 is 4.9%. The omnibus for this year at draft 3 at 6.19%, and we'll talk about this in a moment as there are some drivers to this, is higher than the average, but we have to factor in some things which I'll talk about in just a moment. Okay. So this shows the evolution of this budget cycle. So on draft 1, which was presented to the board in FinCom on January 13th, there was an increase of over 1.2 million from last year, or a 7% increase in the budget. Then draft 2 was issued on February 21st, and it went down slightly to about just over $1 million increase at 6.48%. And then on the bottom where we are now at draft 3, an increase of, again, just over 1 million at 1,049,000 or 6.19% increase. Next. So let's just drill that down a little bit more as a summary for draft 3 of the omnibus. So as you can see on the top here this was the increase in draft 2. Here's the increase in draft 3. So since between the two, we've reduced the budget about 48,597. What I want to point out in the draft that you have, draft 3, the increase at 1,049,932 is, from our perspective, the maximum budget cost ceiling. We do not see any other increases for draft 3. Draft 3 also includes all of the unknown cost variables, both good and bad, from draft 2. So this, if you will, with certainty, is the ceiling of the increase. It could only go down from here. What changed from draft 2 to draft 3? There are various minor budget reductions. We use the term scrubbing. So throughout the whole process, Barbara, Carrie, Carly, myself, with department heads are constantly reviewing the budget as submitted, looking for efficiencies and reductions. So there was about 23,597 unidentified in reductions of the budget. As I mentioned earlier, the funding of the reserve fund is at 175,000. We reduced that another 25,000 from draft 2. So it was sitting at 200,000 in draft 2. We feel that that is a solid number. We would not, from our perspective, recommend lowering that any further. The budget includes the 2% cost of living adjustment, the COLA for all non-union personnel. Per the town's financial policies, I made a recommendation to the select board back in February, recommending a 2% increase. The board did approve that. I want to point out that this is still subject to town meeting approval. So when you see the budget in the warrant and at town meeting, it will clearly indicate that there is a 2% cost of living adjustment. If you look at the metrics we use to determine this, based on this year, because of inflation and other cost factors, it could have easily been higher, but the feeling was that 2% was sustainable. And we're seeing a lot of towns this year going with 3s, 4s, and 5s, but we've consistently been at 2. The cost impact is about $52,000 for that, the 2% COLA. Beneath that, the town hall clerical union contract, those contractual costs, the impact is about $55,000. The cost impact of the non-union personnel service contracts, about $35,000. And then since draft 2, I just want to point out, IT informed us, and I met with IT, with Cindy, and we verified with the town's insurer, there are new cybersecurity insurance requirements that are mandatory. The issue of cybersecurity and claims has gone, fortunately not for Ayer, but many places in the marketplace. We have to have this additional cybersecurity insurance compliance, which is a $9,000 cost. Next. I'm going to now, Madam Chair, turn it over to Selectman Hood, who is also the chair of the Capital Planning Committee. We have 3 slides he has with a brief overview on capital.
Thank you, Robert. The Capital Planning Committee unanimously approved the recommendation for capital of $8,555,867, which is an increase of 260% over fiscal year 2023. You okay?
Yeah, just to hear that kind of a percent increase. Wow.
I was like that too when I first saw it. So capital spending was reduced in fiscal year 22 and 23 due to uncertainty of COVID-19. The increase for fiscal year 24 is exacerbated by inflationary price increases and supply chain disruptions, which are causing delays. Currently, there are 2 debt exclusions that will be presented at town meeting on April 24th and at the annual town election for May 9th for approval. The first debt exclusion is the West Main Street Bridge. So per Mass DOT, the bridge is in dire need of repair this year, particularly this construction season. Due to the location as a major artery, the construction must be split. So one side at one time, then the other side, so traffic can go around within the street itself. So that's adding to our construction time and our cost. And also the overall cost increase for materials and labor has gone up since the original request was put in. There was initial funding approved of $1.2 million by town meeting in 2017. The second debt exclusion is a ladder 1 replacement. Ladder 1 was placed in service in 1996. Current backlog from the vendor is 22 to 24 months. And the ladder truck cannot be ordered without approved funding in place. So the expected delivery time is 2025. And the debt exclusion for the ladder truck will not actually have a tax impact until we take delivery of the truck in 2025. A couple of the projects I want to just highlight for capital. For Kitty Junction, I know that the playground plays an important part in our community. Currently, there's $300,000 in CPC funds and $320 in capital funds that were requested in 2023 and approved by town meeting. Of that funding, in addition to the $100,000 from the state delegation, we have $552,000 remaining for construction. The remediation of the contaminated soil has increased since the project began in the initial estimates, which has driven that part of the cost up. And also the cost of equipment has significantly increased over the original estimates, impacting the total needed funds. So the funding for this project is split into 2. Fiscal year 2024 CPC funding request of an additional $750,000. And a fiscal year 2024 capital funding request of $220,000 that was approved by the committee. A couple of projects in the water and sewer enterprise funds to point out. One is the Washington Street water tower painting. It's $450,000 to strip and paint the water tower. This was built in 1995 and has never been painted in its entire life. By doing this in this year, it does help establish reduced costs of scheduled maintenance going forward. And DPW has to be able to be proactive going forward with their maintenance on an annual or biannual basis. Wastewater inflow and infiltration repairs. $1.25 million repair to the water sewer system from Westford Road to Central Ave pumping station. And then water main rehabilitation, $300,000 was requested and approved to continue replacement of old water main pipes across the town. And with that, Robert, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And just to point out, all of the capital information is on that budget webpage. The projects, the big projects that Selectman Hood just mentioned, I also want to point out, many of them will have brief presentations at town meeting as well from the respective departments as we move forward. And tonight, the departments are here to answer any questions on capital as well. So this slide here is a wage and expense analysis. And why I put this up here is a municipality, if you look at it, is really a service industry. We provide public services to residents in the form of public safety, public health, general government, culture and recreation, education, of course, but as we know, there's a separate under the regional school districts and so forth. And so what I put up here is to show that the wages, expenses, if you look at wages by department, 57.9% is police and fire wages. This is to hire the most qualified police and fire, and we look to hire the most qualified in all positions. And we want to ensure that we continue to invest in our people through education and training. And we also want to be competitive in the marketplace for the most qualified and professional personnel. And we want to also be able to retain them by being competitive. So the biggest piece is the public safety part of the wages. And if you would look at almost most towns on some level proportionately, you're going to look at the largest being in public safety. The second largest is the Department of Public Works in orange at 13.26%. The 2.65% is the Human Services, and then Culture and Recreation at 6.98%. And then the general government, which most of it is housed here at the town hall at about 19.2%. And then if you look at the other graph, the expenses, what I wanted to point out over the whole budget is 50% of the wage and expenses is wages. So 50% is wages. And then another 26% are benefits, health insurance, and so forth. And that's why one of the things this year, unfortunately, the significant increase in the health insurance has a significant impact on the budget. You can see the debt at 5.9%, and then other expenses at 17%. But again, our expenses, almost 3/4 of them are wages and benefits, a lot of which is also driven by contractual agreements and other requirements. Next. So the FY24 budget drivers, just briefly, as I mentioned, this budget as it sits right now is at 6.19%. We would all like to see it a little bit lower, and I'm cautiously optimistic that when we come back to the select board and the FinCom on April 4th for approval, we can make a few further reductions downward to get it a little bit lower without impacting services. So what is driving this budget? So the contractual union and non-union personnel costs and benefits, because it's the largest part of the budget, those increases do drive the budget, not just this year, but any year. I do want to point out that in the clerical contract, there were some structural corrections that needed to be there in their pay grid because it had not been updated and addressed in quite some time. The entry-level positions in this union were paying less than you could make at McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts, in some cases, as we looked at it, even below the minimum wage. So we need to adjust that. The second bullet, the inflationary costs of goods and services, we all just have to think about our own personal budgets. the municipal budget is no different. There are significant increases in energy and fuel and costs in goods and services. And through the capital process, which we can talk about, some of the capital items increased significantly in a matter of weeks. We are in a very hyper inflationary environment right now. The increases in energy and fuel costs, increase in postage costs, the unforeseen increase of 13.75% in health insurance costs. I had put in the worst case scenario at 15%, and we were realistically hoping for 10%. We're in a group health insurance with other towns. And unfortunately, it came in at 13.75%, which was higher. We had budgeted in draft 1 for a maximum of 15%, but that was on the higher end. There is also a new police sergeant position proposed, an administrative sergeant position in the police budget. The police chief has presented that to the finance committee at their last meeting. I know he's presented that to the select board at previous meetings. Is prepared to speak to that at town meeting or tonight through you, Madam Chair, if there's any questions. The other personnel change is an increase from part-time to full-time for the assistant building inspector. The building department is the full-time building commissioner. Last year, through support from the select board, FinCom, and town meeting, we put a full-time, part-time assistant building inspector in for code enforcement. And there's really, again, the need for full-time. Again, Mr. Schultz came before the select board in February and made his case and presented that, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Unfortunately, he's not here tonight, but we'll be able to answer any questions at town meeting. So those are the main sort of areas where there's a drive this year. Next. So the use of free cash. So every year, the town, and like I mentioned, the last 7 years, it's been over $1 million. We get certified free cash that's certified by the Department of Revenue. And then it is subject to appropriation by town meeting. So what this slide is, and I just want to stress, this slide was presented by Barbara and I to the buy board and to the select board last night. At the top, the keyword is recommended uses of free cash. This is sort of our recommendation or our proposal for the select board and FinCom to consider, and ultimately town meeting to approve. So at the top, there's the 1.9 million in certified free cash. The UDAG, the Urban Development Action Grant, is under the select board. This is a grant, a fund that the select board from time to time has authorized a portion of funding, generally for economic development or infrastructure related projects. One of the things per the policy and per the select board is when we use this fund, we like to replenish it to keep it moving, forward. So there is one project, which was the Park Street study for the underground potential for underground utilities on Park Street for $14,185. We're recommending that consider replenishing the fund there. The second item, the library HVAC system had an unfortunate situation back in June after the budget process had been completed and the budget had been set. And the issue was that if action wasn't taken, the heating system would not have been operational by the fall. This goes into supply chain issues and so forth. And Mr. Schultz from facilities is here, if there's questions, can give the whole story. I'll give the snapshot. In order to get this resolved for the fall, the library authorized $35,000 from their special funds, from their trust funds, to do this repair. And we are proposing that we replenish those trust funds with the $35,000 at town meeting. The next item, the GASB 45 OPEB, this is the post-employment benefits that the town funds. As many of you know, for several years now, the town has put $300,000 towards these. Per policy, we use the local meals tax plus free cash to get to the $300,000. This portion, the 145,636, would be the free cash piece. The balance would come from the local meals tax. That would put us at the 300,000. The next item, the forward funding of the pension. We started doing this 2 years ago because we're in a position, we get a pension assessment each year from the Middlesex Retirement Board for our employees. There is the ability to forward fund that pension assessment, and by doing that, you realize savings, but you realize savings with 2 criteria met. One, that you do 2 years of forward funding, and the savings hits every second year. Fortunately, this year, if you look in draft 3, I believe it was about a 1.6%, 1.87% increase. It shows the savings. If we hadn't done the forward funding, it would have been more around 6.5 to 7. So we're proposing for your consideration, continuing to forward fund the pension for the savings, with the caveat that it would be 300,000 this year and hopefully 300,000 next year, subject to free cash. The compensated absences balance revenue fund that was created by the 2020 town meeting. It's a fund that is created by town meeting and funded by town meeting, that when there are retirements or separations from service in the town, if we owe payouts or money, accrued vacation and so forth. Historically, how that happened, it was sort of a wait and see approach. We tried to see if there were going to be retirements, and you don't always know when they were going to be. Then when they presented themselves, they either hit the departmental budget that the employee was from, or we had to go for a reserve fund transfer. And this is sort of more of a best practice that's recommended by DOR and so forth. So there's about $50,000 in the account now. The target recommendation is about around 60 or so thousand that we should have in that. Based on what we know today, we're recommending a consideration for 10,000 to fund that. The next 2, capital stabilization and stabilization, as I talked about in the beginning, those are our reserves. This area, there's some flexibility. I'm sure there'll be some discussion tonight. Capital stabilization is think of it as the town's savings account or the town's rainy day account for major capital, whether they're capital projects or say a capital issue. There's a catastrophic break in a water main or so forth. It could be funded from here. Again, requires a town meeting and a 2/3 vote of town meeting. We have been building that up over the last several budget cycles because there are a lot of major capital needs in the future. Stabilization is for can be anything, including capital, but generally other unforeseen significant costs. These 2 numbers, there's some flexibility. We're proposing the majority again in capital at 750, stabilization at 359,073, and of that 359, 300,000 of that would be to take into account the 4th year impact of when the SAFER grant for the 4 new firefighters were going to be coming up in the last year. Last year, 400,000 was put in stabilization. We're recommending 300,000, and then next year, assuming the free cash levels, 200,000, and that's to plan ahead for the impact when the grant for those positions goes away. Lastly, a new opportunity, and through the chair, I have Barbara explain this bond anticipation note payment, which is a new consideration that Barbara did identify, and as our new finance manager, that has some potential savings, and we feel that we wanted to bring this forward. We brought it to the buy board and to the select board, and we'll be coming to the FinCom. And just through the chair, Barbara, if you want to just briefly explain the thoughts behind that recommendation.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. So generally, the town of Ayer goes to bond in May of each fiscal year. Because of the critical need of the West Main Street Bridge and the need to have funding sooner in the year during fiscal 24, I've decided to extend the a short-term borrowing until the fall of fiscal 24. So what this does is it opens up an opportunity for us to pay down that short-term borrowing before it goes out to a long-term borrowing. So my proposal is to take 3 existing capital projects that are in the short-term borrowing that already exists. One is a lighting project for $70,000, a paving project for $200,000, and an HVAC project for $52,565. And if we were able to pay those principal balances down, when we go to long-term borrowing, we wouldn't have to borrow for them. And after doing some projections, I'm estimating we'll save about $90,000 in future interest costs. And also, of course, those annual debt payments to principal won't occur in future years. So those will also help reduce, and I'm hoping to help smooth out these increases in our capital items that are coming to fruition next year.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
So that's sort of a recommendation from our professional vantage point. For the next slide, we're almost done. The recommended uses of free cash. So on this, I just point out that the draft 3, we're total draft 3 budget would be just over 18 million. Per the town's financial policy, stabilization should strive to be a minimum of 7% of the operating revenue, which would be a balance of over 1.2 million. And as you saw on the earlier slide, we exceed that minimum. So we are meeting the policy on that. We can continue to achieve that. As the third bullet, the last several years, as I mentioned, we've been increasing capital stabilization in preparation for any significant capital emergencies or future capital needs. And the amount recommended for stabilization, however we decided when we put together the financing for the SAFER grant, we're recommending at $300,000 go into stabilization for the purposes of the SAFER grant impacts for the firefighters. And at the bottom is sort of just what we put potential stabilization scenarios. So again, scenario 1 is sort of what the previous slide was, putting $750,000 in capital, $359,000 in stabilization, keeping in mind that $300,000 of that, the thought is to mitigate costs on the SAFER grant. Or you could do a scenario 2 where there's a little less in capital and more in stabilization. Or then scenario 3, which I guess you could maybe call dealer's choice, or however you want to look at it, would be any combination of that 1.1 million. So there's 1,109,000 in remaining free cash. That's assuming you do get all of the recommendations on the other side. You could divvy that up in different manners. For example, I'm just saying if we didn't do the bond piece, for example, that's 300, that proposal, you'd be adding another 300,000 to that 1.1, so you'd have more for the split or some of the others. So some thoughts and decisions there. Next. So next steps in the budget process. So I just want to highlight these are coming attractions on Monday, March 27th. At 6 p.m. on Zoom. That's the select board's meeting. But the first item is the water and sewer rate public hearing. This is where the rate committee will present its recommendations to the select board, which is also who are also the water and sewer commissioners for the FY24 water and sewer rates. On Friday, March 31st at noon, that's the deadline for all warrant articles. And that's also the deadline for any citizens' petitions to the town clerk's office. On Tuesday, April 4th at 6, that's the select board's meeting. The select board will be approving the annual town meeting warrant, and the FinCom will be joining them to make any recommendations and review on articles, specifically financial articles. Once the warrant is approved on April 4th, by April 7th, the warrant will be publicly posted, and it will be in one of the public posted places is the town's website, and it will be sent to print and mailing to all Ayer households in advance of town meeting. Town meeting is on April 24th at 7 in the high school auditorium. And we do point out that on Tuesday, May 9th is the annual town election, here at Town Hall, where in addition to all of the local offices that are up on the ballot, there will be two debt exclusion questions for voters to consider. One is the replacement of the West Main Street Bridge, and the other one is the fire ladder truck, as Mr. Hood mentioned in his part of the presentation. Next. Last but not least, for more information, as I mentioned, this is a snapshot of the FY24 budget page on the town website. If you go to that, you can see the hyperlinks. It has the public budget forums on the top, has all of the supporting documents, including the drafts of the budget, all of the capital, video, so forth. If you go there and you need something in hard copy, let us know. And if there are any questions, please contact my office, either by email or phone or any of the departments. The big takeaway is we want people to have the information. We want the people to be informed coming into town meeting. It makes for a better discussion and a better town meeting. So with that, Madam Chair, I thank you for the opportunity. That concludes the presentation, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So first I'm going to ask if there are any questions, comments, input from the select board and then the finance committee. So Scott?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Sean?
I don't have any questions, thanks.
Okay, I have a quick question, just out of curiosity, because I'm trying to wrap my brain as to why it would go up. On the health insurance, do we know what the driver is? Because I mean, for anything else, we can pretty much say it's electric or it's fuel, but what's the driver on this? More claims? What do we know?
So yes, so there are two principal areas. One is so we're in multiple towns and entities in the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group. So one is the claims history, as there's more claims that drives it. Also in the Minuteman Neshoba Health Group, two towns have left the group, Carlisle and Harvard. So with their departure, as well as increased claims, that created an increase. Additionally, and Amanda Lewis, our benefits and payroll manager, who is here tonight, is our voting representative there, actually voted against this increase because they have some reserves, and we were hoping that they would use some reserves to mitigate that increase more down to 10%. Unfortunately, they're concerned about their reserve levels and didn't want to do that. And when it came to a vote, I think it was 5-4. Ayer was one of them voting no. They went with this scenario. So that was the history behind that drive. But Ayer was consistent, as well as our vote through Amanda it really felt they should have used some of the reserves and had it more around 10%.
So, you know, when you think about it, the reserves rainy day fund.
Yeah.
So it's so funny about a rainy day fund because everyone's always afraid to use it. It's like it's pouring outside, the water's in the basement, but nope, we're not going to touch the rainy day fund. So, well, thank you, Amanda, for at least, you know, trying to stick up for us. So quick question, Amanda, is there any way that we can join someplace else that could help with our future costs?
That is something that we are thinking or talking about exploring in the future.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think that was all I had. Finance committee.
Andrew, I'll go with the first.
No questions from me.
What did he say?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation.
Jim, would you have any questions? And Kurt, I don't have any questions at this point, but thank you for the presentation.
Okay. All right. At this time, I will open it up to public input. I ask that just everyone be cognizant about somebody else who might want to ask a question. So, you know, in other words, you know, keep an eye on time so somebody else can ask a question too. So, anybody have any questions?
James.
James, okay. Yes, James.
Yes, I have a question for the chief, but I want to make a statement first. Chief, you know I like you before you became chief. I also like you now. But my question is on around the police sergeant. I don't have a clear understanding. Will that only be for training, or will that be additional work for the sergeant.
Madam Chair, just through you,
yes,
we'll have folks, departments, if their questions, so everybody can hear.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so so if I understand the question is what is the responsibility or the kind of the job function of the new sergeant?
Correct.
Yeah, so it will be generally administrative. With a lot of the duties happening right now is taking our patrol supervisor and keeping them into in the station doing administrative work. So what we're hoping to gain from this is to have that same level of expertise staying in the station while also having the supervisor out on the road.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? No. Okay. All right. Anybody else have a question? Wait. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I saw it. Okay. Pauline, wait. I saw Sarah first out of the corner of my eye. Sarah, could you speak up a little bit?
Sarah waiting on the garage Shirley Road. I was wondering how much in ARPA funds the town has left.
So, Madam Chair, to Ms. Withy's question, there's approximately $1.3 million remaining in the ARPA, and the select board has been discussing that, and actually, as of last night, we'll be discussing again on March 27th, but it's approximately $1.3 million.
That's my question.
Okay. Pauline?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of things, but I promise they are all very brief. And I want to also thank Robert and Carly for giving me all these hard copy documents I've asked for in the last couple of days. I want to talk about free cash, but before I do that, I want to talk about the debt exclusion articles. I know that you all have been reviewing the financial policies to update them for 2023. And I have no questions about that. But I found something in there that I have been asking for at town meeting for, I'd say at least the last 10 years. When we receive warrant articles for borrow articles and debt exclusion articles, the financial policies state that the capital planning committee, so Scott, maybe this is a question for you to answer, shall be required to present to the select board a detailed accounting of the effect of the passage of such an article would have on the town's tax rate and the effect it would have on the average tax bill in the town of Ayer. We all who remember the school building fund article, I forget how many years ago, but it was a lot of millions of dollars. The school committee presented at town meeting that the average impact on residents' tax bills would be $200 a year. And I still believe, even today, that that was a precipitating cause of it passing. So we have debt exclusion articles totaling several $1 million, one for the bridge and one for the fire truck, 3.9 total. Is it possible that the capital planning committee or Ms. Tierney can provide the data that will show what the actual impact will be for the term of borrowing on people's tax bills? We get the first year borrowing, but and I'm not going to repeat everything in the financial policies, but the financial policies clearly say that the first year borrowing is minimal. It's the long-term borrowing that is an impact on the tax levy. And I've asked this question for years. So I'm hoping we can finally move forward and bring that information to the taxpayers for at least these two articles. But then there's another $3-something million in regular debt that I think we should also, I think you should also provide that information to all of us so we know exactly what it's costing us over the years. Is that something that we could anticipate for this town meeting?
Madam Chair, Pauline, we hear your question loud and clear. I'm going to through the chair to Barbara, the finance manager. The answer is yes, but I'll have her speak to it.
Through you, Madam Chair. So we did do during our capital committee meetings, our due diligence on the effect on the tax rate for the debt exclusions. We did a median household amount that I retained from the assessor, and I did give her some projected debt estimates that I calculated based on the debt exclusions, and we did come up with a projected household impact for the debt exclusions. And the amount we had was basically, it was going to be about $98.35 on a median household residential. And I did do extensive projections on our upcoming bond issue that I have planned in the fall. I based it on the debt exclusions and the maturing bands that we're going to then do one large bond issue, which is just over $11 million total. And I do have the projected debt with me. I did not bring the projected debt on the tax rate with me tonight, but I can 100% get that very quickly from the assessor. Does that help you? But we did go over the debt exclusion specifically on the tax rate during the capital planning.
And thank you. That's wonderful, because that's a number I have asked at town meeting for, I can't remember how many years. And I've always been told, well, we don't have that, but yet it's a number that should be presented, at least according to our financial policies, to the selectmen for approval. And I think putting it on the warrant makes it a lot easier for people, I hate to use this word, but to swallow. $98 a year makes a big difference when you're looking at 1.4 or $3.9 million in borrowing. So I thank you for that, Ms. Tierney.
You're welcome.
The other thing I found in financial policies, and I know that's not the topic of discussion, but this is also a budget item. There's something called a capital expense fund, which I understand is different from capital stabilization. And the capital expense fund is supposed to be funded every year for, I think it was 8%. I'm not looking at the paperwork right now. I'm sorry, I'm moving away from the speaker because I'm trying to look at my paperwork. Can anybody tell me what is in that capital expense fund? Because that's supposed to fund what's called regular debt.
So, okay. For you, Madam Chair. So I have been reviewing that fund specifically with the town accountant, actually just recently as we speak. So what that fund, I believe, was established for is to take small amounts from different capital projects and try to retain and reserve them and be able to transfer them to other projects. So you'll see specifically on this annual town meeting, we do have some closeout of various capital projects that are done, that have money left. We're also going to be rescinding some borrow authorizations that we're going to have to borrow the full amount and clean that up. And on top of that, the accountant and I have been just recently starting to work on the capital expense fund to see where it's at and what we're going to need from it for fiscal 24.
Well, thank you for that, because I understand the capital expense fund is supposed to roll over year to year to year.
It does roll over. So if there's some balances left and they're small, we'll retain a small percentage. And it does increase generally every year unless we use it.
Is there any way to know what of the 3.7 million in other regular debt will actually be funded from that fund?
I don't have that information yet tonight.
No, I understand you don't have it tonight. I kept catching you off guard. But is it something that we can receive before town meeting?
So can you repeat the question? How much of the $3.7 million in debt?
In regular debt, as opposed to the debt exclusion articles, what of that 3.7 million might be funded from this capital expense fund? And I'm going to just say to all of you out there, you know, I've been involved in this town for 30 years. I never heard of this before I started looking at these financial policies. So I apologize for asking this question.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you, Pauline.
All right. A couple other things, if you don't mind. I said I had two different areas. I want to talk a little bit about free cash, as I mentioned last night. And I opted to wait until tonight. I have two suggestions. And I emailed Robert and I said, one I think is easy, the other requires some thought. We spent $7,000 of 4th of July revolving fund on fireworks for Devon's Day last year. I appreciate and understand the rationale behind it, but free cash can be used to replenish funds used from other sources. I would like to suggest, since I understand, and you all know I understand that there is an event planned for this July 4th weekend. I would like to suggest we take $7,000 from free cash and replace it in the revolving fund for the July 4th event. Those funds are only supposed to be spent for July 4th, according to the bylaw. Devon's Day was not a July 4th event, but we have almost $2 million. We can put $7,000 back in the revolving fund. So I would like you all to consider that, if you would, and you don't have to answer me tonight.
Madam Chair, to Ms. Conley, we'll definitely consider that, Pauline, and take that under advisement. I just want to verify, it might have been, I think it was 5,000. We don't have to, but I understand what your request is.
Thank you. And whatever the amount was, right?
Yeah.
I would say thank you personally to everybody for doing that, because that's an event very near and dear to my heart. The other item under free cash, and this is where I think we need some thought. So again, no answer needed tonight. I'm also an avid walker, and we've had a lot of discussion back and forth about crossing signs and crosswalks and the difficulty and so on. Is there any way free cash can be used for capital purchases or capital expenses? I forget what Dan calls them, but the flashing crosswalk signs. Can we establish a fund?
Official name.
I'm sorry?
I said, that's the official name, the flashing crosswalk.
Yeah, exactly. He's got an acronym for him and I don't remember. But I would like to see the town establish I know it should be a line item in the DPW budget. There is a line item in there for street lighting that we created, I don't know how many years ago, Robert, to fund the streetlights that were missing on Main Street. But I'd really like to see more of these flashing crossing signs. I watch people try to cross Central Ave every day, and I try to do it myself every day.
Dan's gonna answer.
And we have new pedestrians. You can't get across that street. I waited for 7 cars the other day. A person I work with couldn't get across at all. And one of the women who's at the Federated Church was almost hit Sunday morning on Adams and Central. It's not working, and I don't know if we can do anything more. But if we establish funds for it.
Good, Dan's here to answer the question.
Yeah, hi, Pauline, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I know we've been in touch about that specific crosswalk as well, and we've done some engineering evaluation there to do some improvements. I do like the idea of using the RRFBs. That's the acronym.
RFB.
RRFB, rectangular rapid flashing beacon. But
one more time for the
rectangular rapid flashing beacon.
Okay, the RRFB. Don't anyone forget that.
And they have been very effective. You know, we did get a shared streets and spaces grant and put in the one at the Groton Street crossing where the rail trail crossing was, which was especially hazardous if you were heading toward town from Groton. It was pretty blind there, as well as others you've seen around town. So we do kind of, on a case-by-case basis, analyze, crosswalks, and you take into account there's a lot of engineering you have to take into account with traffic counts and site viewing, site distance and stuff like that. So, at this point, we've been getting grant funds for these. We, do a case-by-case basis. I don't know. I wouldn't want to just put them up indiscriminately. We kind of want to just look at it anywhere we're going to do it. And then at that point, if the engineering shows this should probably have an RFP, then we would, you know, look for a way to fund it kind of. Double R. Yeah.
How through the chair, Dan, how much, I know there's different variables. What would the cost be?
It's
roughly.
Yeah, it's a little under 10 grand for just one set. Okay. They're solar powered too. So so yeah, we did you know, they're all along East Main Street as well with the new project we had completed. It looks pretty good.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if they're 10 grand a piece and we have $2 million in free cash and we set aside $100,000 for these flashing signs, we can get
RFP.
Yeah, you can live with that, Janet. I'll call them flashing signs. But that's 10 signs. And I'm sure there are at least 10 places where they belong. Sandy Pond Beach is one that comes to mind immediately. But Dan, I appreciate everything you've done, but you can't see me, you can't see other people when there are cars parked along that crosswalk. And I know there's more stenciling to be done come better weather, but they don't pay attention to that. And if they're looking at their phone while they're driving down Central Ave, a flashing sign isn't going to save me either. So I don't get out there until there's nobody there. But I shouldn't have, I'm sorry to personalize
Okay,
this.
Colleen, I
you get it.
I want to cut you off,
you.
but I have other people that have asked questions too.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And thank you, Robert and Carly.
All right, Sheila Carmen.
Here I am. Sorry, my mic was on. Talking about crosswalks, I walked yesterday down to the dollar store from Pleasant Street. And when you go down Groton Street, there's no crosswalk over Park Street to get to the sidewalk. The sidewalk is on the other side by the gas station and the plazas and everything there. And that's a dangerous place to cross. Just a crosswalk, I don't care about the flashing lights, but the crosswalk would be good.
Okay, all right. Dan, you heard that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Dan's going to add that to his list to look at.
Thank you.
Okay. Lori.
Thank you. Oh, I'm doubling my side. Hang on.
What?
She's on it twice, so she's probably.
I'm on my phone too. Oh. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question, hang on, I apologize. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. I have a completely different line of questions, or a main question, I guess. It's I appreciate the other questions that have been asked. I would appreciate having a few descriptions of how the Ayer Library gets its support and budget through the town. What I'm specifically interested in is, I learned over the years that we can't call it the Ayer Public Library because it's not. Yet we do pay for it. We fund it with our budgets. There are line items we talked about tonight that have to do with repairs to the building. Libraries are very important. We want to support them. And I'm just really confused about who manages the library and how they seem to make decisions without much input from the board of selectmen, or the select board, or anybody else in town, yet we provide the funding. So if this is the proper venue, could somebody please help me understand?
We have actually the head of the library here.
Oh.
So you're in luck.
I don't see them.
Please introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, I'm Luke Kirkland, Library Director. Hi, Lori, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. So I'm the new director, been here just since August. So it's the full history. There are others here who can chime in with other various elements. The The library is incorporated. It's what's called a corporation library. There are many of these across the state, and there are various arrangements that are made between municipalities and the library organizations. The library, our library was established state law, as I understand it, as an independent entity that to be run and managed by the Board of Trustees. Historically, the library is funded through taxpayer funding through town budgets. We're super grateful for that. And governance is nevertheless under the oversight of the trustees and the library director. There is a variety. There are a variety of areas where we cross over, and there are services that the town provides the library that we're very grateful for, and you know, it is an interesting arrangement, right? But it's what's been the case for many years prior to my arrival, and you know, so far I've just been spending a lot of time trying to understand all these workings and connect with the folks on the town side to ensure that the communication and functioning of the library is as efficient and effective as possible.
So would it help for, so would it help too if somebody also contacted the Board of Trustees? Do they have open meetings that people can attend?
So we have a board meeting tomorrow at 6 at the library that anyone is welcome to join. There'll be a public comment portion where folks can ask questions that along these lines for some additional clarity. Yeah.
Okay, Lori?
Yeah, I do have some follow-up questions. I'm glad you're there. You mentioned government groups oversee the director and the work that's done. Can you elaborate on which government groups oversee the library?
I don't remember saying that a government group oversees the library. What I said was that the Board of Trustees is the oversight body for the library. They are established through state law as the organization that runs, well, not running in the day-to-day operations sense, but they are the folks who own the library,
make the policy.
So develop policies. Yeah. So
I'm a member of the trustee elected. I saw on the town board, so you can actually assist and run for the other member.
Exactly. Yeah. So
in that sense, that the board of trustee is composed of citizens.
100%. Yeah. So all the board members have been elected to various terms of various length. You can visit the website actually to see the article of incorporation and learn more about the actual language of the law that established the organization in this way. Yep.
Okay, so let's see, a couple of things. If I wanted to contact the Board of Trustees, is there a standard email? Because these people are volunteers, right? So
they're elected officials, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a website, there's a page on the Town of Ayer website that has the email addresses of the board members.
Okay. Now so lots of these boards are operated by volunteers. And so sometimes we hold back kind of bothering the volunteers because they're volunteers, you know? So is the responsibility of the board of directors to respond to emails that they may receive to ask questions or clarifications?
So the Board of Trustees has a certain scope of responsibilities, and that does not include the day-to-day operations of the library. That's the responsibility of me. So if you have questions about day-to-day operations, and this is something we've discussed already, you can contact me. Those operations will be discussed at board meetings, but ultimate responsibility for the day-to-day operations are rest with the director exclusively. So
as you know, I requested to be on the agenda for the upcoming board meeting, and I was not allowed to because of a decision I believe you had made. And the board of trustees stood behind you, which I guess is what they need to do. So they caught in
I'm just gonna, I need to kind of temper this meeting a little bit because we got to talk about the budget. So, but you mentioned that you have a board of directors meeting tomorrow night and public can attend at 6 p.m. at the library. So Lori, I would recommend that you attend that because then you can get all your questions asked and we can go back to the budget.
One last question that I'd like to ask is the public comment period is at the very end of your meeting. At least that's the way it's been listed recently. If it could be moved to the beginning, like most other boards have, that would be very helpful.
We did move it to the beginning because that's something that I find helpful as well. So the current agenda that should be posted shows the public comment at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, Dennis.
Yeah, I have a process question and a question for each of the chiefs. First, and I know I've spoken about this publicly before, so I'm not going to belabor this too much the point regarding the numbers. But it remains unclear to me the need for, and again, I use the word need, the need for the 4 additional SAFER grant federally funded firefighters.
But that was approved at town meeting last year.
No, I understand. Okay. But this year, I don't understand your comment, Jen.
Well, because I thought for a second there you were going to try to rehash what happened at town meeting. So, well, okay. So go ahead.
It appears that for this year, you are endeavoring to set aside $300,000 for the out years on the grant.
Correct.
Hence my concern. I still haven't come to understand the defined need for these 4 additional firefighters. The need seems to have arisen after the acquisition of the grant. That is, in 2017, 2016, 2018, that need did not seem to exist. The federal grant became available. Ayer won the grant. We get the 4 additional firefighters. And now that need does exist. And it would appear that, and again, we've had these numbers, towns of our relative size, relative population, none of them have anything approaching, as I understand it, 19 full-time firefighter EMTs. None in the entire state. I understand that the 1710 NFPA standard and the 1720 NFPA standard are different standards. It's my understanding that for combination fire departments, it's the 1720 standard. And again, this is just a kind of recommended standard from an industry group. It's not a legal requirement because every other town in the state would be lacking meeting that requirement. And so now we are in a position of having to kind of the fact that we are pre-funding the out years for the 5th year, potentially the 6th year, in my view, does not bode well for the 7th, 8th, and 9th years. And the use of mutual aid, again, it's all tied up into our staffing, our tax dollars, our equipment. It remains, and I know that the chief and the deputy chief, it's about 40% of all ambulance calls go out of town.
So what's your question then?
So that's a good question. What steps can be taken to not presume that we will continue with the 4 additional firefighters after the termination of the SAFER grant?
Okay, I'm going to let Robert answer that.
So, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Curran, and perhaps there's a lot to unpack there, but there's just two things I want to clarify. The statement that the 4 firefighters comes after we got the grant, respectfully, is not correct. And let me just explain. For the record, the issue of the minimum manning first presented itself, I've been here since 2010, began with the discussion in 2011. And we can agree to disagree, which we have, about all of the intricacies on the floor. But I want to make it clear that the discussion about meeting that standard is over 12 years old, number one. Number two, the town applied for the federal SAFER grant before and was turned down because it is a competitive grant based on specific standards based on need. So a third-party federal SAFER program, you don't just apply and get it. We were denied once, and it is need-based. And I'm speaking just very conceptually in the interest of time. The chief is the interest. So I think one of the key takeaways is that the need did not just appear. The whole thing goes back, whether people followed it or not, back to at least, and I'm speaking from my time, 2011. Chief, it may even gone longer. That's number one. Number two, we've applied for the SAFER grant before and didn't get it. And then when we did get it, it is based on a third-party competitive need basis. The final point that I would, Madam Chair, just like to talk about is the stabilization funding piece. So for this, to keep it conceptual, the grant covers the costs for 3 years, let's say for the sake of discussion, about $1 million. It is up to the thought was where the free cash is where it is, that at the end of the 3 years, that $1 million grant sunsets, as it does with any SAFER grant recipient. The decision at that point is, do we be proactive to address those impacts by putting aside funding in stabilization so that in year 4, we can mitigate those impacts. Now, there can be a debate. People can disagree with that proposal, but the proposal was $400,000 last year. We're looking at $300,000, as I said, this year, and then $200,000 next year, subject to the availability of free cash. That's number one. Number two, I want to make it clear that we are, if you will, we around this table are saying it's, quote, earmarked for that. I want to make it clear that it's still just going into stabilization, that ultimately it is the decision of town meeting on that. The last piece that Ms. Tierney and I have begun to look at with the chief, the 400, 300, and 200,000 as we're getting towards the sunsetting of the grant, is to look at the actual impact, because even without this forward funding, without doing all the due diligence, I think that the budget within reason could absorb some of those costs, but we're trying to mitigate that increase. So there's a lot, and Mr. Curran and I have talked a lot about it. I'm sure we will continue. The 3 takeaways from my vantage point, it is important to note that this did not just come out of the sun to get 4 new firefighters. Number 2, there's a federal third-party entity that has nothing to do with the fire department or the town that's involved in it. We applied to it for twice. And third, the belief and the support has been for that need, and there's an opportunity to forward fund it, but that's up to town meeting.
So just to clarify what you said, last year at town meeting, I watched it on TV. Mm-hmm. Last year, the town already approved at town meeting $400,000 for the forward funding for when the SAFER grant ends, correct?
Correct.
So town meeting did that. There was an article on that. Yes. No. So what I'm saying is that the town has already indicated that they're willing to forward fund. And now we're going to go back and say, okay, we're going to ask you again to continue that. So it does go to town meeting.
Well, no, I understand. And it was my understanding from town council on the floor at town meeting that it is not permissible for a given year to dictate to a future year how that money will be spent. And I understand that in the explanatory note, it was kind of indicated that that's what we sort of like to do with it. But town council made clear that that is not, it cannot be dictated as such, and each year must decide. So the town, that is, we did not have the authority to approve that funding. We only had sort of, I guess, the ability to indicate some vague desire that that's what we ought to think it ought to go.
So we've earmarked it. So that's what we're saying, right? We've earmarked it.
Madam Chair.
But as you just said, that if there was an emergency, could we get that money?
So let me, if I could just briefly to clarify. What we did, to be clear, we did not, and this was discussed at great length, we did not create a specific stabilization account for, just to be clear, for that 400,000 to be for the SAFER grant. What we did is we put the town of Ayer put 400, and I think it was, there's a little bit more, but we put 400 and something thousand, town meeting did, into stabilization. The explanatory note suggests that the intent is to look to the forward funding. The explanatory note, as you know, Madam Chair, has no legal standing. The future of town meeting, so say in year 4, when the grant expires, and say we put the 900,000 in stabilization. If we were to use it to mitigate the impacts for the SAFER grant, there would have to be a specific warrant article for that, which would have to be supported by the select board to get on the warrant, and it would be up to town meeting. So just to be clear, we put the money is in stabilization. We are suggesting there could be a whole different select board, there could be a different town manager, there could be a different town meeting. Just to be clear.
So in reality,
yeah.
Okay, all we're doing is we've said to town meeting, we want to put $400,000 aside. What we're thinking about is for this purpose, but it's going into this account, and tomorrow, if all heck blows up, we can still access that money via an emergency town meeting because we've just had an emergency.
Correct.
So it's just an earmark. And so like he said, so what we're doing is we're putting aside money for a rainy day, okay? And when it comes time, we would be asking the town again to use that money in a certain way. So though in the explanatory note is really because the way the articles are written, you've got so much of I's and thou's and these, it's like, what? So that's to just give you the quick synopsis, and that's the purpose of it. So we're really not, we're saying we're forward funding for this purpose, but it might not get used that way if the town says no.
Yes, which is kind of my overriding concern. And again, Robert and I have talked at some length about it. I've talked on the floor of town meeting about it. I think that the citizens of the town should kind of look at this with a great degree of granularity and try to determine where does the need lie. And I think a comparative analysis is warranted, given that, I mean this sincerely, I don't think there's another town in the state with population between 7 and 10,000, let's say, that has anywhere near approaching 19 full-time firefighters.
Yes.
To you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to recall for annual town meeting last year, we originally had just over $5,000 going to the stabilization fund. And at a citizen's request on the floor at town meeting, we took that 400,000 and added it to the stabilization fund for the purpose of earmarking and easing the impact. So that was actually our citizens and our residents that made that change right on the floor.
Okay. So I think that what, as usual, we're going to have the presentation at town meeting. It will, and I watched it, and I watched everyone discuss it and everything, and it will get discussed at town meeting and where everyone can get decide. But I also agree with Mr. Curran that everyone needs to look at it thoroughly so that you make an informed decision.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So a couple things on what Mr. Pomprian said. So the SAFER grant started, and these don't hold me to the years, but maybe 2016, 17. So what happened is we had two major fires in Ayer during the daytime when the truck pulled up with one person on it. So the crux of the SAFER grant is it's all about safety. So imagine pulling up two significant fires with one person, the other two on an ambulance call. So that's what drove that with my predecessor, Chief Pedrazi. We applied for the grant first time, we denied, got it on the second, correct, Debbie? Yes. Got it on the second. So this was all out, and before we were notified of the award, we brought it to the select board in a public forum. They could accept it or deny it. You know, they chose to accept it, we moved forward. That's on the state grant. As mutual aid goes, we did almost 2,800 calls last year. As Mr. Curran said, 600 of those were ALS. As we presented at the FinCom, most of those, well, statutorily, we must respond to those calls because we're an ALS ambulance. And statutorily, we can't say no unless we don't have any of our ambulance in service or we don't have the manpower. So we can't do that, or we don't have a license to keep. Even if we take those 600 calls away, we're still doing 2,200 calls, but we got to protect the citizens of Ayer. And the good thing about those 600 calls, we're generally back in our service area in 15 to 20 minutes, and that is taking care of with the staffing that is on duty already. There are some calls that we call back, but primarily on duty. And the last thing I'll say is about the demographics. I think the town managers hit on this. Ayer is unique. We have residential, we have commercial, we have industrial, we have trains, we have hospitals. So I don't think you can look or you can handpick towns from 7 to 10,000 and say, not like Ayer. They could be bedroom communities. We do all kinds of stuff. There's truck traffic, there's train traffic, car traffic. So I think it's hard to Google Massachusetts towns 7 to 10,000. Say, no, not like Ayer. They only have 5 firefighters or 6. And there are other towns. Littleton matches up to us perfectly. There are 10,000 people. They have 19 firefighters, same staffing as us. Plainville, the same exact way. Who else? Millis, there's Southborough. So I think there are towns. You just got to look. The demographics are unique here. And public safety is unique. You know, not just me, DPW, police department. Deputy, did I miss it? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. So just move on. So my next question is for the other chief. The regional dispatch service, and I know we touched on that briefly last time we met. I guess the question is, it's my understanding that the regional dispatch service came into existence in 2017. Then for a period of 3 years, I didn't see the contract, but you know, it evidently existed. And then in 2020, there was a 3-year contract which expired this June. And that's to fund the region or the agreement between Ayer and Shirley for the purposes of running the regional dispatch service.
Right, because the state of Massachusetts specifically came to the town of Ayer and said, you need to help Shirley.
Okay. So it's my understanding that town of Shirley has been paying Ayer $145,000 a year to run the dispatch service. And evidently that does not adequately cover the real costs associated with that. And that number was determined 3 years ago. And, you know, Robert has indicated, you know, costs have risen significantly across the board on any number of measures. So my question is, how do we make an arrangement with Shirley for the regional dispatch service such that the Ayer taxpayers are not supplementing Shirley's portion of the dispatch service?
Let me take a slight stab at it through the chair. So it was, and don't hold me to the dates, but I'm going to say like 2017, the town of Shirley was unable to provide the necessary 911 services to them. We were already set up as is required by all towns to have a backup. So so everything had to default to us because 911 has to go somewhere. So we entered into a very quick kind of, well, actually 2016, 2017, it just happened. We had to absorb it. And then as we moved into a more formalized agreement, we really had no idea what the cost of this was going to be because the dispatch fell under the police department and it was just one budget. So moving into, so we had a 1-year contract, and then as you said that we were wrapping up a 3-year contract right now. And even then, we knew that we weren't going to have a really good bullseye kind of number. But we gave it our best effort with the numbers that we had, and we came up with a contract that the town of Shirley did pay into. We recognized that there was some differences of what we believe the assessment should be. 911 helped offset that. So currently right now we're going to be moving into the next one. So part of the goal of the budget that in moving into this year has been to clearly or more clearly identify the actual operating costs of the regional dispatch center. And as we were talking about, we had money coming out of the police side and going down into the dispatch side. So the budget is very, right now, kind of, not, I think convoluted is the wrong word, but it's not clear because money's moving around. But what we're doing is we're making a clear picture so we can make this better assessment going forward. And that's the goal, is to be more transparent for the citizens of both Ayer and Shirley to understand what it costs to run the dispatch center, and then using usage data. From the usage data, we then can come up with a better kind of division of who's responsible for that.
Madam Chair, just excellent job, Chief. Just one other piece to add. In 2017, 2 key forces came. One was Shirley's inability to effectively do the dispatch was a concern of state 911 that oversees the whole thing, as the chief talked about. But the other key thing, and it came before this board prior to this, is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they want regional dispatchers. They don't want any single town dispatch center. And we had just invested prior to this through all grant funded $1.5 million in the dispatch center. And what happened was before here, state 911 was also saying to Ayer, you need to get into a regional arrangement. And one of the things that came before the board here when I was here was the Devon's regional dispatch. And I'm not going to disparage them, but look into the record there. There's all kinds of issues. The Board of Selectmen at that time, not only them, the residents said, we want our own dispatchers, our own people. So the key thing is, yes, there was the Shirley piece, which through state 911, we took on, but also we were faced with the issue at the time of having to get into a regional, so we ended up hosting it. The second thing I just want to point out, and I've gone on record as this, and this is no mystery in Shirley if they're listening, we all know, as does the select board, the new agreement coming up needs to be renegotiated, and Shirley needs to pay more on the assessment. But I want to just, whether this is an issue of parity or not, they pay the $145,000, we pay our part. The difference has been made up by the state 911 grant. So there is a feeling, Shirley still needs to pay its part, but I just want to point out that state 911 has been filling in the difference from the grant. So there is definitely, as the chief touched upon, an opportunity now with the new agreement coming up to improve upon that.
Yes. And I certainly hope that happens. I mean, my long-term concern for the town of Ayer is that the dispatch service is run by Ayer, which is fine, and we have the infrastructure to accommodate that. The communications department evidently has 9 full-time employees who are employees of the town of Ayer. Ultimately, their pension benefits, health insurance benefits, disability, all of it will fall to this town.
Correct.
Correct. If surely something happens and they can't pay their fair share, we're still on the hook for all those employees. If the state somehow kind of equivocates on exactly how much they're going to pay, or however that works out in the political atmosphere, 5 years down the road, the town of Ayer is still on the hook for those employees. And we need to be respectful of that and understand that that Shirley needs to kind of pony up, and the state, if necessary, needs to pony up Shirley's portion.
And they have been.
Okay.
Yep.
No, and that's great.
Yeah.
But things change.
Yep.
If Shirley's listening, all well and good. So I wish you well in your negotiations.
Well, agree. I mean, this has been going on for what, 6 years? Yeah, and like I said, the state came to us, and this was more of a state mandate, and the state has told Shirley, you need to straighten up. So hopefully, we love Shirley, but step up to the plate a little bit. Anybody else? Any questions?
I just have one question.
Yes, Sarah.
For the assessor's office. Did I recall correctly? Did we get a new system when you came on? No.
Could you come up here so that everyone can hear you?
All right. That's okay.
Please say your name for everybody.
I'm Linda McQuaid. I'm the assessor. No, we have put that into a capital request, but we have not. That has not been approved as of yet. And that will be apparent on meeting.
What was the question again?
New software.
New software.
System,
okay, thank you.
Which did come before capital, subject to town meeting approval.
Okay, all right. Third, did that answer your question, or?
That's why I heard it at capital. So
okay.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Madam Chair, Lori has her hand up. I don't think
she had her hand up the whole time.
Oh, okay.
I don't think she ever removed it, so I'm not. I don't. Lori, if you can hear me, do you have another question? Because you still have your hand raised. Yeah, I don't. I think she's had that hand up the whole time. So. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay, well then, if there's nothing else, I'll turn it over to the Finance Committee for adjournment.
Yes, I move.
I'd like the motion to adjourn. I got you every time. Go on.
Oh, he was right on that.
He takes care of the nuts and bolts.
All right. Okay, so you had your motion. Did somebody second it? I didn't hear.
I second it.
All right.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and Andrew flag too.
Okay. All right. Finance Select Board.
I'll make a motion to adjourn select board 7:43 p.m.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Sean?
Sorry, aye.
Scott?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night.